Dean, Nancy, welcome in.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Looking forward to talking it over with you. And Nancy, let's start with you.
Okay.
Tell me about your childhood. Born April 23rd, 1953. Tell me about your mom, your dad, your family, and where you grew up.
I grew up in Carterville, Illinois. It's very small, but people were very close. My parents were Fred and Helen Pearson, and when I was born, I was the last of 3 children. And as my sister always says, you were the baby brat.
Baby brat.
And she said, and I hated you most of the time. And my big brother was just the opposite.
Yeah.
So it was kind of amusing till it wasn't. I got smacked around a lot and put in the closet, and she'd stick cigarettes in my mouth as soon as Mom and Dad left. Other than that, today she's a good sister.
Yeah.
But it sure took a long time to get there.
Yeah.
So.
When you think of your mom and dad, what do you think of? What personality traits come to mind when you think of your parents?
Solid Christian people. They love God. They love their friends, but they could not have been better parents.
Boy, that's the
My
greatest
dad was a engineer and civil engineer, and he his company built housing homes for people who needed them in our area, and they built schools, things like that.
Roadways.
He
That's
built
Southern
Crab
Illinois.
Orchard. He designed Crab Orchard Lake in Southern Illinois, and he was head of that. And my mom happened to be a secretary, and that's how they met. He was from Red Bud, Illinois, and her in Carterville. So had the lake not come along, I wouldn't be here today.
What was childhood like as far as school and what you were doing as far as activities once school was over? What are your recollections growing up in the 50s and 60s?
Well, I really liked it. I walked home from school, and it was quite a ways. And I never thought about being afraid of anybody or anything except a dog that bit me one time. But other than that, it was just a real nice country town, good people.
Yeah. You said everybody kind of knew each other.
Yes.
That was the nature of things.
Yes.
And we'll talk about it. You're now living in Dallas, which is huge. So compare and contrast, I suppose, what it was like to grow up in a small town versus being in a big city, and what you like and what you appreciate about it.
You want Dean to take that one?
No, sure.
I'm kind of disappointed in where we live because the people don't visit. It's like
And by visit, you mean interact, conversation. You're not talking about like visiting.
Just hi, how are you?
Yeah.
You know.
And you grew up and people were friendlier, I gather, is what you're saying. Is that what you?
Everybody knew everybody.
Yeah.
At least enough to say hi.
Yeah. How many people were in your city, your town?
I don't know.
Carterville, well, years and years ago, it was about 3,000, so probably about 1,500 then when she was growing up.
Okay, all right. Yeah. And it was just a tight-knit community, I guess.
It was.
Is what you would say. Nancy.
It was.
Yeah.
And my dad was in a construction, he had a construction office, and my grandfather had a greenhouse. He was the first person to have a greenhouse. Mm-hmm. And he sold produce to everybody all around the area. That was pretty neat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a great thing. Your recollections of your parents and
Nancy's family, just to follow up on that, was they were very close and loving, and the whole family, they like Christmas, Thanksgiving, and the summer, July 4th picnics. I mean, they were all together, all having a good time.
That's the best.
Yeah.
And Grandpa was really a happy person because he had his produce out. When the band came through and all the parents were walking with them and stuff. Great buy over here. Tomatoes, bib lettuce, leaf lettuce. It's all from the greenhouse.
It's all from the greenhouse. Yeah. Oh, that's super cool. That's nice.
Yep.
Those are some great memories, I'm sure. Dean, your recollection of your parents, your family, and your childhood.
Well, I've got a lot of memories, but my mom and dad married very young. Matter of fact, it was illegal because my dad and my mom, they were both underage, and they snuck off. And
How old were they?
I think mom was 14 or 15, and dad was 17, something like that. And they went to Jonesboro. They lived in the Cobb and Anna area, and they went to Jonesboro, which is the county seat, and got married. Then they went back to their own homes, and it was like a month or two before anyone knew they were married. And so that kind of started life out. And being in the country, they had trouble making ends meet, so they ended up coming to East St. Louis and St. Louis to live. So much of my childhood was moving around quite a bit. But we always ended up back in the Southern Illinois, which is where I really grew up at, in the Carbondale area. Then went to school there through sixth grade, and then we moved to Cambria, which is like a community of about 500 people at the time, near Carterville, where Nancy was born and raised, and that's all part of the same school. So that's how I met Nancy.
I see. All right.
So
School.
yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about that moment, because I would gather you both can remember.
Well, you know, we got married in 72, so we celebrated, a year and a half, 2 years ago, 50 years.
Oh.
So we've been married, it'll be 52 years this summer. And then we dated 5 years before that. And before that, we were good friends. We even used to double date, you know, so I've known her, you know, since she was probably 13 or 14 years old. And so it's like we were friends and good friends, and we dated, and we've been together all this time. And so it's been a long time where, you know, we don't even have to even say anything. We know what each of us are thinking.
Yeah.
You know.
What is the key or keys to a long, successful relationship? I want to hear from both of you on this. What do you think makes it work?
Communication.
You go first, Nancy, and I can defend myself.
As a cross-examination, you had no idea this is a deposition.
That was a little too quick. But it is communication, without a doubt. And you learn to sometimes, let me rephrase that. I've learned when to be quiet and when to, let's say, what's really going on. Mm-hmm. Get real. Mm-hmm. And I think for a long time, and I think that's kind of normal when someone gets married, because you're just kind of thinking, things are going good, it's not a big deal. But you know what? When you live together for several years, and then as long as we have, it can be a really big deal.
Mm, yeah.
When you have nothing in common, it takes work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And without God, I don't know if I would have made it or not.
Is that right? So how did your faith play a role in making it?
Well, of course, we lived close to my parents, just around the corner. So our boys were babies and then toddlers and going to school. And it was great because I had the family, but Dean's always worked so many hours. Whatever he's done, he puts everything into it. And so I felt kind of alone, other than maybe neighbors around me.
I see.
Had some church friends and got involved there. But it was a growing experience. So we had good times and funny
Not so
times and
good
not so
times.
good
I mean,
times.
that's if you didn't over 52 years, that
Yeah.
would be something else. So that's just the nature of it. Dean, what is your thought on a successful 52-year?
Well, I think like anyone else, when you first get in any kind of relationship, especially someone you love and you make a commitment to, then after you're into that relationship for a while, you find out that there's things that you didn't consider before, and that was with both of us. But I think that to have a marriage last, you have to make that decision that you're not going to consider separation or divorce, regardless. And we both were raised Christians, and we have strong faith, and I think that's the biggest part of it. And work through issues and communicate, and that's tough.
Yeah.
Nancy grew up with a lot of things in her life that was totally different than the way I was raised, of course. But when she was young, her mother went through an illness, and so she was taken from her when she was real small, and she missed her mom, and through a series of events, thought that she was the fault of her mom being ill. So she had a lot of issues there around that. And I was raised just the opposite, that just to survive, and you do what you have to do to get through. And so, all those things from your past comes into that relationship, and you have to work through it and getting through it together. And right now, we're facing a lot of things, with Nancy's health especially, and so we're getting through it together. Sometimes one day at a time,
Sure.
but you do what you have to do.
Yeah, with your commitment to each other.
Yeah.
Take me back, if you could, to when you proposed and your wedding day.
Yeah, well, living in the area that we lived in, the Cambridge-Carterville area, in the years before, there used to be a lot of coal mines in that area.
Okay.
And they were strip mines where they would remove the topsoil, remove the coal, and then they weren't required by law back then to cover it back up. So
wow.
there was
All
all
right.
these like small mountains and hills, and a lot of water would fill in and make like lakes. And Nancy and I would used to, when we were dating, we'd go back in those areas and park. And one night when she didn't expect it that night, but she knew I was going to propose. But I had the ring, and we were out there, in this environment with, all dirt roads and, the coal and things piled up. And I started talking to her about, about all the coal around us, and then with pressure of coal, it can become under pressure. It becomes something of much more value and everything that led into me giving her a ring and asking her if she would marry me. And later on, of course, she said, you could have done that at a much nicer place than out there in the strip pits.
But you were practicing some romance with some poetry. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, well, that's the way I saw it, at least. And she did say yes.
Yeah. Most importantly, Nancy, what's your recollection of?
Well, he took me to a really nice restaurant, and it was really nice. And I'm frankly kind of surprised he didn't ask me there. Because, he had everything he needed there.
Yeah.
But he felt comfortable going out in the strip pits or whatever.
Yeah.
But, I was just amazed. He just had this nice little talk all fixed, and about that time he got a call that his dad needed him to stop what he was doing and go do some work for him that night,
Oh, that night, the night of the engagement.
the night of our engagement.
Wow.
So that was cut short.
Yeah. Dad was an engineer on the railroad at that time, but he had also contracted work for the Illinois Central Railroad for piggyback service, and I did that when they had trucks and we hauled heavy equipment, and so something came up with that I needed to take care of. So
I see. Okay.
it kind of cut that night short.
Sure. Well, the wedding day, I hope, was able to be uninterrupted. What are your recollections of your wedding day?
Well, I thought it was a fantastic day. We had family from all over who came, and from different states. And it was just, I remember that when I got up that day, I was excited, and at the same time it was like, wow, we're going to have our own place. And I'm not going to have my mom and dad there, although they were just a block or so away, I guess about a half a mile.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it was just excitement.
Yeah.
And it had rained all day. And when we got to the church, I believe, or while we were in church, a rainbow was over the church.
Oh, wow.
And people came out and said, wow. And I said, thank you, Lord. I couldn't ask for more than that present.
Oh, man.
And I thought, we're going to be just fine.
Well, I remember a little bit more of that because you told me, but your dad told me that Nancy was apprehensive that morning and wasn't so sure that she was quite ready to get married. And then I had sent her a dozen roses, and once she got that, then she couldn't wait to get married. And and then, of course, she felt like it was bad luck. She didn't want to see me until she walked down the aisle in her wedding dress. Well, I had happened to drive by their house, and she had gone to get her. She had just left to get her hair fixed. She had her hair up in curlers, and she hit herself because she didn't want me to see her. But when it was, and she was concerned because it was raining all day and cloudy and overcast, and she thought that's a terrible way to begin our life together. And then at the church, I think as we were approaching the church, the rain stopped and a big, beautiful rainbow came out. So it's kind of like a sign that everything's going to be okay.
What a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. You guys get married and you start your family. Tell me about becoming parents.
I loved it. I loved it, and at the same time, I was always having to call Mom and say, I can't get Tim or Joe to stop crying. And she said, well, just hold them. And of course, there was several years difference there. But by Joe, by the time that he was born, I pretty much knew how to handle him. It was just Tim being the first.
Yeah, sure.
So it was an experience, and I'm just glad I was close to family.
And there were times when, like, we called her dad Fritz. That was his nickname. His name was Frederick. And I would be going to work, and Nancy would call and say, Dad, you better come get your grandsons. I'm going to hurt them. He'd say, I'll be right there, sissy.
He had just retired, and he said, I'll be right there, sissy. Just hang in there. I'm just right around the corner, remember? But that was super. It wasn't very often that happened. But I had one day where I was baking a cake, and the kids came through there jumping up and down, and I had to take the cake somewhere that I'd made, and it fell in the oven, just. So I thought, oh, no, now what? But it was just that kind of day, and at the end of it, I thought, all this stuff doesn't matter, but these children do, so.
That's the perspective.
Yeah.
That's the guiding perspective.
And I'm very thankful that I had them and had time to spend with them, and they're both wonderful grown-ups.
You have been kind enough to share some stories of raising your children, and they are some really incredible stories. And I want to start with one about Tim, your older son, and what transpired with him, both in growth, that there was fear that it was cancer, and you and Dean both being in the hospital, and that time period and what you witnessed. So if you would share that story, because it's an incredible story, Nancy.
Okay. I think Tim was what? Did we say 2, 3?
Somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And he was just, we were in St. Elizabeth's Hospital and in Belleville. And I remember we weren't familiar with being around nuns, but they were amazing to him. They just picked him up, carried him around, and he loved it. And then I was so, I had a lot of faith, but when it's your baby and they could have cancer, I just didn't know how to deal with that.
Yeah. We had taken Tim to the dentist, and the dentist found what he called the mucus cell on the back of his tongue, and he wasn't sure what it was, but he had trouble swallowing and clicking his throat. And when it was checked, he needed a specialist to remove it, and they were in Belleville, Illinois, and we were about 100 miles from there. So that's how we ended up at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Belleville. And so we had taken Tim there, checked him in. They had him in his room, and we were both concerned about it, but we were exhausted with what we'd been through.
Sure.
And they wouldn't allow us to stay in the room with him, and he was in the room by himself. So there was a waiting room just maybe 50 feet or less down the hall, at the end of the hall, that we stayed in, and it didn't have anything to lay down on. It's just chairs to sit in. So I tried to close my eyes and rest, but Nancy couldn't rest. So because I was able to close my eyes and maybe nap a little bit, she had an opportunity to witness something that I didn't, and that's what you were going to talk about.
I was sitting over in the corner, and the room was dark, and he was resting fine. And I just kept praying. I said, Lord, please don't let this be cancer. Don't take my baby. And I said, I trust you. I've always believed in you. And there's nothing I can do, but you can. And I just kind of, did I get up and go out and then come back, I think?
Well, what you told me was that you were praying, and we would go in and out of the room just to check on him, but you were in the room with me, and you were praying, and when you looked down the hall, even though with all the lights off in the room, there was a glow in that room, and you went down to see what was happening. When you walked in, you can describe what you heard and saw.
It was so bright, and Tim was sitting up in bed, and he used to put his teeth on his bottom lip if he got excited, And he had done that with his teeth, and he started smiling, and he was going, yes, yes. And I said, Tim, who are you talking to? And he says, I'm talking to Jesus. Don't you see him? I was like, no, but okay. And he started smiling, and he put his teeth on his little lip and just grinning, and he says, Jesus loves me and told me I'm going to be just fine. And guess what? He told me I'm going to be a preacher when I grow up. And he was.
Yeah.
He was for a while, quite a while.
I mean, what a moment that had to be to walk in there. Obviously, you're scared, of course, with what's going on. You're in the hospital, and you see that, and you have that exchange with your 2 or 3 year old son.
And all I could say was, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Because I knew it was like I had the world lifted off of my shoulders.
Yeah.
And it was nothing that I could do or knew how to do, but the Lord took care of us, and it never changed. And that had such an impact on us. Yeah. Even as Christians, we knew the Lord, we thought. But to have an encounter like that and to see our little boy, it's just like he lit up the room, but Jesus was the one, the angels were the ones, and he said, did you see all those angels? I'm like, no, but I would have liked to have. So it was amazing.
You made reference to him eventually becoming a preacher.
Yes, he did.
In his own way. How was that?
Well, he's immediately when we brought him home, it wasn't long before his way he approached going to church just totally changed. We would go to church, and he would sit there, and he became very intent, soaking in every word that the preacher said in the sermon. And he would go home, and he would he was already saw himself as a preacher. So he had built himself like an altar. He built himself his own little pulpit. Mm-hmm. He found an old like a robe that Nancy had, and made that his robe, and he did all these things, and he made a cross. We had relocated, and from the moving boxes, that you put garments in, he took 2 of those things and made a cross out of it. I don't remember how he secured them, but he had a stand and everything and he painted it with gold spray paint. I mean, he put a lot of work and effort into it, and he would hold church. And so he would actually preach the same message that he heard earlier today, and it was the same day, Sunday. Mm-hmm. So he did that for a long time, and then when Joe came along, it didn't change. The only thing that changed was that as Joe was old enough, Tim would get Joe and make sure that he made him sit on the front pew of his little church that he set up, and then he'd line up all the teddy bears, get little chairs and boxes, and line up all the teddy bears in there, and then he would have church, and he would preach the same message that he just heard that day. And later on, we didn't know it at the time, but later we found out that Tim was collecting an offering and requiring Joe to give all his allowance or anything he had into the offering every week. So
that included cookies,
anything that Joe may have a value that would be part of his offering.
Halloween candy. Oh, my. He had to give that.
And later on, as Tim got older and was able to write, he would take notes in church. I mean, extensive notes, and then go home and And we even used to comment afterwards as he got a little older. He said, we would overhear and say, wow, he's about as good as the preacher himself. I mean, he's really getting good at it. So, and he actually later on was a youth pastor and a pastor of a church, for a season. So involved with the church. So what Jesus spoke to him there, and when he was 2 or 3 years old, that he was going to be okay and he was going to be a preacher, actually came about. But it started out with his brother Joe.
With his brother. That was the initial congregation.
Yeah.
You guys make reference to a time where both Tim and Joe were ill during Christmas and spent time in a hospital room together with their own little Christmas tree. What happened then?
They had a viral infection of some type, and it started out with Tim getting it, and then Joe got it, and they were dehydrated and running high fevers. And so I don't remember what it was, but it was intense and very scary.
Sure, for them both to be in the
sometime between it was Thanksgiving, they were already sick. We'd already had them to the doctor several times, and the medication, the treatment, they weren't getting over it, whatever it was. And then leading up to Christmas, of course, we were planning Christmas and had the decorations and tree and the presents, everything at home. And just prior to Christmas, and I don't remember which one went in the hospital first, but they were admitted into the hospital because they were just, you could look at them and you can just tell they were just real weak and dehydrated and just real sick. And then the very next day, the second one was admitted, and so they were in the hospital. And it was really tough because they were needing to put IVs into them. They weren't able to hit the veins and, that sort of thing. And they were just so little and so sick, and our hearts were broken because it was Christmas time, and we were looking forward to having Christmas with them, waking up Christmas morning and them opening their presents and being happy. And we'd actually bought a little, back then, I mean, they hadn't been around very long, but a little car, that ran off a battery, and they both just had looked at it, and we couldn't really afford it, but we had arranged to get one for them. Of course, we couldn't take it to the hospital, but we took them a few presents there, and we set up a little, like a 2 or 3 foot tree, and so we had Christmas in the hospital room, and they were both in the same room. And so that was a real hard,
It was very hard
time. But then we still have pictures that we look at once in a while. But a few days later, when they were released from the hospital, they got to come home, and they saw that little electric car. I mean, they would both jumped into that, and they were so happy, and they rode that thing throughout the house. Just all the time. And even then, coming home from the hospital, they still looked really ill, but they were so happy. They had big grins on their faces. And
as parents, that's got to just be the best.
Yeah.
To see the happiness at that
time,
even though they're going through what they were going through.
Anyone that is a parent, I remember the first time I saw Tim, and I was in the delivery room with him, but the first time I held him without even saying a word, and I can sense that feeling, that, and with Joe too, that at that moment you wouldn't hesitate to give your life for that child, for that baby. And so you have that kind of love that is just natural. Then like when Tim was in the hospital and we didn't know, we're praying that it wouldn't be cancer, or that when both of them are in the hospital and they're so sick and couldn't hold their heads up. And so your heart breaks for your child when you can't do anything to help them.
Sure. Oh, yeah. That's something that any parent can relate to, but you guys had something that many parents never experience, and that is Tim at 2 or 3, as you tell that story, and then both of your children in there at Christmas time as well. A great story that I have here is one of your trips to Disney World and
That was wonderful.
Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah.
Tell me about that story, if you would.
We had a lot of stories that when we took Tim and Joe at a couple different times to Disney World, but with that particular moment, the Disney parade was coming down from the castle, and anyone's been there can remember how that would be. And there'd be thousands of people lined up down the pathway, and then they were coming down to what was like a big roundabout with something out in the middle, and they came around that. Well, we had found a place where we could stand, stand right on the curb where they'd come right by us. And, of course, Tim and Joe both just loved all the Disney characters.
Sure.
Well, Joe was real small, and one of the things that Joe did is a variation of the story. Growing up, he would, a lot of commercials on the radio and TV then about smoking, and about cools and camels and all that.
Yeah.
Well, the way he would say it then, he said, "I want a moke." I want a moke. So we had to watch him real close because back then you could smoke anywhere. And people would be smoking a cigarette, and they'd just throw it on the ground, right, on the road.
Yeah.
Well, Joe was real fast. If he saw a lighted cigarette that just hit the ground, he'd grab that thing real fast and pick it up and put it in his mouth, and he'd start puffing on it.
Boy.
So
Wow.
we had to watch him real fast. So because of that, I had picked him up, and I was holding him in my arms. So as the parade came down, was coming around this big roundabout, and it's coming up to us, it was passing us, and some of the characters were walking alongside and shaking hands and saying hi. Well, Joe saw Jiminy Cricket coming, and he just loved Jiminy Cricket. So as Jiminy Cricket was coming around, Joe, I was holding him, he just put both his hands out like this, like he just wanted to embrace him, and Jiminy Cricket saw him, so he came toward him, and he raised his arms like this. So Jiminy Cricket thought he was just going to give him a big hug. But as he bent down to hug Joe, who was in my arms, Joe grabbed him by the head and pulled him down and laid the big kiss right on the end of his nose. And it just melted our hearts because watching that, and then, there's thousands and thousands of people around that roundabout, and they all in unison all said, "Oh," like that, and it was it's a memory that we'll never forget.
It's true. It was a happy time.
Yeah.
That's the best. How were those Disney World trips?
Well, for me, I was thinking it was a wonderful time with Jiminy Cricket, but I was actually in the nurse's station.
Oh, no.
Yeah, one time, yeah.
I had a heat stroke
Oh, no.
before all that with Jiminy Cricket. And
Yeah, and so we were going through the rides, and it was hot, and Nancy started feeling real bad and got real flushed and weak, so we took her to, a medical center there, that nurse's station, and they checked her out, and they said, well, she's okay, but she's dehydrated, and she needs to rest. So they suggested, why don't you and the boys go and do something, come back in 2 hours or so.
Right.
So, we did that. So they had a bed there for Nancy, and it's air conditioned in there, and they gave her some fluids, and she was resting. So, we were a little restricted. I was,
Yeah.
and Tim was a little older, but Joe was still real young. He was still maybe 3 or 4 years old. So we went, and I think it was called Space Mountain. But it was the mountain with a roller coaster ride
Space
through
Mountain.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Absolutely.
Tim and I wanted to ride that, and Tim was a little nervous, but I told Joe, I said, oh, this is going to be so much fun, and Tim too, and I said, it's going to be great. And Joe said, I don't know. I said, Joe, if you don't want to do it, we won't do it. But I said, let's just go and see what it's like. So I coaxed him into it, and of course the line took us a long time to get up there, and we were going through the thing, and as we got closer, Joe said, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it, and he started crying. I said, it's okay, Joe. I said, you see how the people, they were like a flume, you set one in from the other and from the other, but people who decided that they didn't want to do it. They just stepped on it and stepped across, and then they exited, right?
Yeah.
Well, what I did was when we got up and it was our turn, and as soon as you sat down in it, it took off.
It goes.
Right?
I remember that thing. Yeah.
So what I said was, okay, let's do this. I said, I told Joe, I said, we'll just step through and go the other side. We don't have to do it. And so when we were stepping through, I just sat down. I pulled Joe down in front of me and Tim like that. And then we just took off, and it was too late then. And of course you go down, and then you immediately take a dive, and you make a left, and we went through that whole thing, and Joe was screaming the whole time. And we got to the end, and Joe never hit me before, but we got to the end, and he hit me. He slapped me real hard and said, "I'm so mad at you." But it was a great time. Tim was laughing, and we had a good time on it. But that's one of the things we did while Nancy was in the nurse's station.
And he felt better after he told me.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, as soon as we went back to get Nancy, then he told on me.
Well, it sounds like there's some pranking that's going on in the family throughout. For your 50th wedding anniversary, Tim and Joe rented a large house in the Gatlinburg Mountains. Where you celebrated your anniversary with them and the family, and there was a bear cub sighting, of sorts.
Yeah. And we'd always gone to Gatlinburg for many years because we went there on our honeymoon, and we went back there for many years every year. Then we lived in Atlanta, Georgia for 10 years back in the 90s, and we were close enough, so we would go there, and Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina. Multiple times a year. So that's why they took us there. But for our 50th anniversary, they did rent this beautiful chalet home in the mountains and beautiful view. And we were there, and of course, there's black bears there and all kinds of wildlife. And we saw a lot of wildlife there. Well, it was funny because Joe and Tim had come to me, and they said, and Nate, Tim's son, he's funny, likes to do a lot of things. So he came to me, and he said, he and Tim told me, he said, Nate had a pair of pajamas that were like woolly and it looked like a bear. And he said that he wanted to scare everyone and pretend like he was a bear. But then he said, but Tim told him, he said, well, that may not be a good idea because Manny, he calls me Manny, and said, Grandpa, I'm Manny to all the grandkids. He said, Manny carries, and he said, he might shoot you. and so when Nate was telling me this, and he said, Manny, if you were to shoot me, they may have to take me to the hospital. And he never did catch me. I said, Nate, if I shot you, they wouldn't be taking you to the hospital. And Tim just laughed. But anyway, what happened was they decided they needed to let me in on it. So they told me that they were going to do something, but they didn't tell me when. And I completely forgot about it. But we were in the house, and then all I know is Tim came running in the house, and he said, everyone come outside, said, there's a bear out here. There's a little bear cub out here. And I said, really? And I was saying, well, be careful because the mother bear is going to be pretty close. I mean, we've encountered that before. So we went out, and we had our cars parked out in that area. And Tim said, come on over here, come on, here it is. And so Nancy was coming around the others, and I was standing there. And Nancy was looking around to see if she could see the little bear cub. And about that time, Nate comes out growling, and growling. And Nancy just about fainted because, you see something brown come around the car and growling, and you're expecting a bear cub. Yeah. And she just about had a heart attack.
I did. I was petrified.
And so she grabbed her heart, and
I said, that kid, he's something. He's always doing something mischievous.
But it was so much fun. And then, of course, he brings that every once in a while about the time when he did that, and Nancy almost had a heart attack.
Tell me what it's like to be grandparents. Clearly, you guys have an incredible relationship with your family. What is it like to be grandparents?
I love it.
I
Yeah.
figured as much.
Of course, I don't know, they're all different, but you love them.
Mm-hmm.
You love them all. It's kind of difficult with seeing our son Joe in Georgia because we're all the way in Texas now.
Texas, right?
Yeah.
But his children are just wonderful. He's got a daughter, Colette, in
She's just finishing her first year in college.
yes,
Yeah, doing great.
and she's a wonderful gal. And then we've got Davis,
Yeah.
and he's I don't know how many years younger, but quite a bit.
He's about this. Yeah, he's about the same age as Nate.
They are
about
the
fifth
same
grade.
age,
Yeah.
Okay.
so that's kind of neat.
Oh yeah, that's super cool. And how do you enjoy being
Well, you know, I
grandpa?
describe-
Or Manny is.
Yeah,
as you're known.
well, I'll tell you how my name Manny came about. Our Tim's firstborn, Abigail, when she was real small, what was Ice Age was a movie, and,
It was.
and she loved Ice Age, and remember the big mammoth named Manny?
Mm-hmm.
That was probably her favorite character, and I used to do things that to scare the kids, like jump out or something. And one time I even Nancy, but I startled her, and she said, "Manny," like that, and
It was Manny.
and ever since I've been Manny to all our grandkids. So that's how that came about. But
And she had that little
grandkids.
finger pointed at
Yeah.
me when she said, Manny. And I thought, that a girl.
But I described earlier about how I felt when, like Tim and Joe were born, in that sense that, you wouldn't hesitate to do whatever you need to do, even giving your life up for them
Yeah.
to protect them. Well, grandkids is a step further than that. Grandkids, you don't have the minute by minute, day by day, taking care of them and clothing them and all the expense and all the time and all that, but you just take them, you love them, you spoil them all you want, and you give them back.
And you give them back.
And all our grandkids are fantastic. They're, they've all been through different things, and a lot of them, things have been tough and hard.
Sure.
But like everyone else, but they're all unique and different. We love them, and we're so proud of each and every one of them because each one of them in their own right are doing very well, and they're very balanced, and so grandkids are great.
Yeah. What else could you ask for as parents and
Yeah.
grandparents? I thought, and I believe this is you who wrote this, Dean, but perhaps I'm wrong. I don't want to speak. What do you know now about living a happy and successful life that you didn't know when you were 20? This is always one of my favorite questions to get
Yeah.
answers for. So I will read this to refresh your memory. Success is not the accumulation of money and things, or a title or position of power or authority. Identify what's important to you early in life and prioritize your life around these things. If you don't do this, others will make decisions for you, and you will find yourself enslaved to an ungratified and unfulfilled life. I thought that was incredibly poignant.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make sure I read it.
Well, I wrote that a few days ago when I submitted it to you.
Yeah.
And but my life, the way I was raised, I didn't have a lot of direction or input or guidance toward, thinking about who I wanted to be when I grew up or what I needed to do in preparation for a successful life, or even what a successful life is. So when we got married, I didn't have a good job. I was struggled. And after a while, after a couple different jobs, I got a job as a UPS driver, which had good benefits and good wages. What I learned at a young age, and I've been through a lot, but what I learned is if you don't take the time to analyze yourself and know who you are and what's important to you, as far as priorities, then other people will make those decisions for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're in like a corporate environment, which I was most of my career, and if you don't make those decisions, because the decisions you make determine the path you're going to be on. And if you're not careful, like what I did and what we did, when we first got married, there weren't any credit cards. And so, but when credit cards first came around, we used them as if they were cash, but then we couldn't pay them off. So we got to, like many others, we got into debt, got over our heads, and the work that I was doing, I did what I felt like I had to do to get by. And what I found was, after a while, I felt like my life was out of control. I had very little influence over my life. It was what I had to do. And looking back, it was all based on decisions that I had made without considering the ramifications or the direction it's going to take me, or the consequences or the cost associated with it. So over the years, and many years ago, we got to the point where we were able to pay all our debt off, and we've been debt-free all this time. And, of course, when you're debt-free, that equates into freedom, and then we've learned, who we are in Christ and who we are to each other and what's really important. God first, Nancy and me, we're second, and our immediate family is third. And then, if you don't have time for anything else, at least you've covered the most important things.
Sure.
And so that's why I wrote that.
Yeah, it's really really insightful, and I think a lot of people, I'm sure, in your family who will listen and watch this will take some great guidance from it. So that's why I wanted to make sure.
It didn't take us long to get into debt, but it took us years to get out of it.
That's a good cautionary tale. I don't feel like schools do a great job of teaching kids just basic financials. And then you make these mistakes that, as you said, can take years to get out of.
Yeah.
With regard to that question, I will now ask you, Nancy, what do you know now about living a happy and successful life that you did not know when you were 20 or so years old?
That's a good question. Because I was thinking of my time at home, and I had some really good values because my parents, I was their late in life child, so I was one of three. And so I felt like I had some really good direction. Help me.
Well, you always you were raised in an environment where the priorities were already established and were clear for you. And so when we got married, that was already instilled in you, and that helped me a lot. And her dad took me under his wing and helped me because I didn't have much direction before that. But I think that has been a lot that I've grown because my being close to Nancy and have learned from that. That the most important thing is not a paycheck or a title. The most important thing in your life is what's important to you, and that's what makes you happy. And things and money, they're nice to have, and money gives you freedom to do what you want to do sometimes. But at the end of the day, being able to go to sleep and have peace in your life and sleep and be able to go to sleep there's a lot of value to that. And being
Yes.
around your people you love is more important than having things. And
Yes, it is.
so that's what I learned from just around Nancy's family. You know, my family, we would have family events, but it was totally different, and we weren't nearly as close. And when I started dating Nancy and started being around her, and afterwards when we were married and when Tim and Joe came along, it's like every holiday, it was Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving, and a lot of times July 4th or other, it didn't have to be a holiday. You just had a picnic, and there'd be 40, 50 people there, and everyone knew everyone, and you loved everyone, and you just had a great time.
That's the best. That's the
Yeah.
best. Final question for you. Tim, Joe, your grandchildren, and maybe some great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren who are not even around yet will watch this, will listen to this. What would you want to make sure you include in our conversation and or say to your family members?
I think I would say when you meet someone and you fall in love, it takes time. And you can nurture it, and it's so much better. Take time to listen to one another. And if you're really upset about something, don't hold it in. Let them know. And even if you have to say, okay, I can't do this anymore today, let's put it off. Think about it, but get it settled.
I've heard that a few times.
That's that communication we were talking about earlier.
That's right.
That's a great
You
one.
have to have that.
Yes. Yep. It's imperative.
And there's nothing you can't overcome when you do it together.
Yeah.
And God's in the middle of it.
Yeah.
You can get there. But if you start going this left and he's going right, and you're too busy, and you're supposed to be home at 6 o'clock, and you come in at 9 o'clock, Mama's not a happy person.
Yeah, that's going to cause a problem.
You know the old saying.
Which means the boys have probably been in some trouble that they didn't expect to.
Yeah, I understand that. Where were you going with the old saying there, Dean? I think I know where.
When Mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
Yep, husbands and fathers know that one.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What would you like to make sure you include and or say, Dean?
I would say that be true to yourself.
Yeah.
Take the time to know yourself and know what is important to you, and prioritize those things, and don't compromise. Take a stand, and if it means sacrifice up front in the long run, you'll have a much more gratifying life and successful life.
Yeah.
Things that really happen, and try to guard your peace. And you do that by choosing not to waste time or effort or energy on things that you don't control, but focus on those things that you can influence, and then prioritize and walk your life out in peace, and focus on those things that it's important to you. And at the end of the day, don't worry about what other people think. Just worry about who you are in Christ, and be yourself, and things work out. And that would be what I would say.
Some great wisdom from both of you, and some incredible stories as well. Dean, Nancy, thank you so much for your time. I have loved our conversation today.
Yeah, it's been very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've enjoyed it too.